This is an audio-video project of mine that, personally, I've been debating with myself whether or not it's worth the time to make. After all, I'm quite literally going to be reading from a literal Hitler speech and just getting mad and occasionally laughing at the sheer absurdities and hatred that the man spews. Truth be told, we do tend to hear a lot about Hitler, but we don't really focus much on what he said or how he said it, at least assuming you're an American listener. I guess this makes sense, considering I doubt most Americans speak German. I'm specifically reading from the book Landmark Speeches of National Socialism, which is an academic look at various Nazi speeches. To help give some background to it, I'm going to start by reading the introduction. The magic force of the spoken word, the National Socialist approach to rhetoric. National Socialism was the most prolific rhetorical movement of the 20th century. It depended on public speaking both from necessity, particularly in its early years, and principle. Hitler expressed the party's fundamental focus on public speaking in his semi-autobiographical book Mein Kampf, published in 1925. Quote, "The power which has always started the greatest religious and political avalanches in history rolling has, from time immemorial, been the magic power of the spoken word, and that alone." End quote. After the Nazis took power, a propagandist wrote, quote, "When coming generations look back on the period of struggle and development of the National Socialist movement, one of the most interesting and significant conclusions they will draw is that seldom in the history of the German people, indeed that of humanity itself, did the spoken word, that direct personal contact between the leader of a young and rising movement and the whole people, have such importance as this significant period in the history of the German people." End quote. The speeches in this book provide a representative example of the rhetoric that moved a civilized nation to support Nazism and to close its eyes to the crimes that were not difficult to see. After 1945, many Germans claimed that they had not known what was happening, but that is not persuasive. Nazism was vague in the details of its plans, but clear as to its goals. Everything that Nazism intended was revealed in its rhetoric. He who had ears could have heard. Hitler's views on propaganda. Hitler claimed no originality on propaganda, writing that he had learned its principles by studying the church, the Marxist parties, and Germany's enemies. Propaganda, he argued, is an art, the basic principles of which might be learned by anyone, but mastery depended on innate ability. He thought that the average person is uninterested in complex arguments, being ruled more by emotion than intellect. Nazi rhetoric, therefore, avoided presenting detailed solutions to complex problems. The effective leader, Hitler thought, made things seem simple and could, quote, "make even adversaries far removed from one another seem to belong to a single category," end quote. A speaker who attempts to persuade an audience by a complicated, developed argument or by attacking multiple enemies is doomed to fail. A speaker should aim at the lowest common denominator, speaking so that everyone in the audience could understand. Quote, "Among 1,000 speakers, there is perhaps only a single one who can manage to speak to locksmiths and university professors at the same time in a form which not only is suitable to the receptivity of both parties, but also influences both parties with equal effect or actually lashes them into a wild storm of applause." End quote. Hitler was confident of his own ability to do that. Propaganda also needed to be one-sided. Since the masses did not understand complex issues, presenting balanced arguments would only shake their confidence in the rightness of a cause. Hitler used propaganda during World War I as an example. The Germans, cursed by hyper-objectivity, he claimed, allowed public discussion about the degree of Germany's responsibility for the war, whereas the Allies, despite their protestations of free speech, accused Germany of being guilty and sealed their argument with the Treaty of Versailles, which declared Germany entirely responsible for the war. What propaganda does say needs to be repeated over and over again, quote, until the last member of the public understands what you want him to understand by your slogan, end quote. Only when an audience has heard a point made repeatedly will it begin to respond. Hitler did not mean that the message should be repeated in the same way, but rather that varied forms needed to be found to hammer an idea into an audience. A speaker's physical presence makes oral rhetoric more flexible. A printed page is a finished product, Hitler wrote, unable to change its form from one reader to another. But a speech can be altered even as it is being given. Quote, while the speaker gets a continuous correction of his speech from the crowd he is addressing, since he can always see the faces of his listeners to what extent they can follow his arguments with understanding, and whether the impression and the effects of his words lead to the desired goal, the writer does not know his readers at all, end quote. A speech, then, even with the same basic content, can vary significantly as it is given to varied audiences. A speaker, Hitler thought, should stand before an audience with the fervor of an evangelist, preaching a religious faith. Passion, not rational argument, is the key to persuasion. Quote, all great movements are popular movements, volcanic eruptions of human passions and emotional sentiments, stirred either by the cruel goddess of distress or by the firebrand of the word hurled among the masses, end quote. And the speaker's own passion is increased as he faces a responsive audience. Hitler viewed the crowd as a powerful persuasive force. He described a person who, quote, steps for the first time into a mass meeting and has thousands and thousands of people of the same opinions around him, when, as a seeker, he is swept away by 3,000 or 4,000 others into a mighty effect of suggestive intoxication and enthusiasm, when the visible success and agreement of thousands confirm to him the rightness of the new doctrine, and for the first time arouse doubt in the truth of his previous conviction, then he himself has succumbed to the magic influence of what we might designate as mass suggestion, end quote. This is unlikely to happen to someone reading a book at home, or in this case, listening to me. Well, I will say, in the very off chance I am that persuasive, do something nice for your community. Also send me money. Hitler's rhetorical views also reflected his quote-unquote leadership principle, or Führerprinzip. Leaders emerged through struggle, through reaching the masses, not through discussions around a conference table. Without direct personal contact between a leader and his followers, a leader can never demonstrate his abilities. As Hitler wrote, quote, to be a leader means to be able to move the masses, end quote. Think of the great leaders of history, he asked. The French Revolution spread not through books, but through fiery oratory. Marxism triumphed not because of Marx's thick books, but because of, quote, tens of thousands of untiring agitators, from the great agitator down to the small trade union official and the shop steward and discussion speaker. This work consisted of the hundreds of thousands of meetings at which, standing on the table in smoky taverns, these people's orators hammered at the masses, and thus were able to acquire a marvelous knowledge of this human material, which really put them in a position to choose the best weapons for attacking the fortress of public opinion, end quote. A public speech provided the opportunity for a politician to demonstrate his ability to lead. If he failed to win an audience, he failed the test of leadership. To understand Nazi propaganda, whether in 1930 or today, one turns to Adolf Hitler. Other Nazis had important roles in propaganda, but no one had nearly as central a role in determining its nature and basic principles. Goebbels was a master of the tactics of propaganda, and had a central role in building the vast Nazi propaganda system, but even he reflected Hitler's thinking on broad issues. In sum, Nazism saw oratory as an indispensable method of propaganda, the best way to reach the masses. Without it, they said, they could have neither won power in the first place, nor held on to it afterwards. I should say that the book does have, well, let's just say another very long part of the intro dedicated to the history of Hitler himself and his rise through the NSDAP ranks. And by rise through the ranks, I mean he just kind of joined, and after being popular for long enough, demanded that he be given all the authority over the party, as well as some other statements about how propaganda worked in the nation of Nazi Germany. I'm not going to be reading all that because that would just take a while. I will now move to the beginning of the specific speech that I want to cover. Thankfully, this speech has its own little intro provided by the authors that gives a bit of context regarding what the heck Hitler is trying to say and, well, when the speech was even given. So, Adolf Hitler, re-establishing the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the 27th of February, 1925. Hitler joined the tiny German Workers' Party in 1919. He quickly became its leader. On the 9th of November, 1923, at the height of the great German inflation, in fact, on the 20th of November, $1 US was equal to 4 trillion German marks, Hitler risked a coup. He led his followers through the streets of Munich to the Feldner Hall, a war memorial where waiting police opened fire. 16 of Hitler's followers were killed. Hitler himself was arrested, and after a trial that he turned into a political platform, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. The party was banned, and its remnants degenerated into squabbling factions. Hitler stood outside the fray, using his time in prison to write Mein Kampf. He was released in December 1924 after serving only 9 months of his term, and set about rebuilding the party. He chose the same beer hall from which he had launched his abortive revolution 15 months earlier. 3,000 people packed the hall, and several thousand more were turned away. He entered to the passionate applause of the audience, and gave the 2-hour speech that follows. Its first 3/4 offered nothing that most in the audience had not already heard, and would hear again in Hitler's future speeches. He reviewed Germany's history, claiming that past conservative parties had no contact with the masses, and that leftist parties pretended to address the problems faced by ordinary Germans, but actually served the interests of the Jews who controlled them. He also outlined his views on propaganda. In the last quarter of the speech, he moved to re-establish his control of the party. He claimed absolute authority. Anyone unwilling to obey could go his own way. Hitler, quote-unquote, forgave those who had made mistakes in his absence, and demanded that there be no criticism of him or the party for 1 year. The audience responded with enthusiasm. After the speech, Hitler arranged what Ian Kershaw calls, quote, a piece of pure theater, end quote. The Nazi leaders who had fought for supremacy while Hitler was in prison all, quote, mounted the platform and, among emotional scenes, with many standing on chairs and tables, and the crowd pressing forward from the back of the hall, shook hands, forgave each other, and swore undying loyalty to their leader. It was like medieval vassals swearing fealty to their overlord, end quote. The speech succeeded. Hitler once again was absolute leader of the party. Alrighty, I'm on a new audio file now. I can be a bit more laid back. Similar to my old... Hang on, I'm just gonna loudly move my chair. There we go. Yeah, similar to my Dave Sim vids, I got some apple cider. However, this time I got some sparkling apple cider. Non-alcoholic, of course. This means I'm gonna be burping quite a lot. And you know what? Yeah, I'm just gonna go with that. Because this is literally fucking Hitler we're talking about. This dude doesn't deserve the smallest iota of respect. This speech I'm about to read, you're going to hear me seethe, mauled, and laugh a few times. Well, actually, I don't know if I can mauled very well. I've got some really thick hair, like... It's like dummy thick as heck, man. Yeah, if I wasn't a coward, I'd show my face and you'd see what I mean. Actually, now that I think about it, yeah, I guess you'd have to feel it. Oh. Speech delivered to a mass meeting of the National Socialist German Worker Party. German It literally opens with German racial comrades. Okay, wait. German racial comrades. You know, maybe it's a translation thing, but like, come on. I am not speaking to you today to give an account of the past. Okay. You know Hitler was a big liar. Well, guess what? This entire freaking speech is an account of the past. Okay, you know what? He probably means like, oh, an account of the beer hall punch or something, but he even mentions it a few times, so I really don't know what the heck he means by his first sentence, well, aside from the intro. Oh my, this guy is so full of shit. Even the first sentence of his speech is a lie. Oh, God. You received the last report from us on the 27th of January, 1923, at what was then the General Membership Meeting. We gave you a public accounting of the period up until the 8th and 9th of November 1923 during the trial. Today we have another question. What is to happen in the future? There's an interrobang here. What is to happen in the future? Yeah. I do ask you to listen to me as I give a brief review of the past. Like, see, he literally just said, just move back up a little. I am not speaking to you today to give an account of the past. Then here, I do ask you to listen to me as I give a brief review of the past. I fucking vey. You know, I can never control when I burped. The question of what should happen today can best be answered if we attempt to explain why our movement was founded in the first place. What were the causes that led to the founding of this new party? Think back to the year 1918. In midsummer, the German people stood at the height of its power. Within a few months, it had collapsed, fully defeated, shattered, and in ruins. The pressing question was, back then, was there a way out of this deepest misery and misfortune? Let's see, there's a footnote here. Let me just scroll to the bottom of this ebook. Alrighty. Footnote numero tres. Okay, yeah, the Nazis argued that Germany had lost World War I not on the battlefield, but because it had been quote-unquote stabbed in the back by traitors within Germany. Although the argument was false, Germans found it plausible since, even in November of 1918, when Germany agreed to an armistice, its armies were still on foreign soil. And, yeah, truth be told, this does kind of make sense, at least. Like, how can I for anyone who's a bit less familiar with World War I, Germany was basically suffering from what I like to call war entropy. Even though Germany had defeated Russia, and its troops were, on paper, moving closer and closer to Paris and through other countries, many years of non-stop war had basically drained a lot of German supplies. It had caused a literal destruction of the workforce, especially of young able-bodied men. And then to top it off, close to the end of the war, the USA, which is a nation that had not been suffering war atrophy the past few years, joined in against Germany. For all intents and purposes, the German High Command basically decided to cut its losses and surrender rather than deal with the very real possibility of British, French, and American forces, among others who I just don't know off the top of my head, causing even more damage to Germany. Okay, let's get back to the speech. Everyone back then asked that question. It even demanded the thinking in the minds of those who had perhaps helped to bring about the collapse. In their lucid moments, they too asked if and how Germany might one day rise again. One had to be clear about the fact that the German people faced a great and fateful question, and that the survival or death of our people for the rest of history depended on the answer. The tragedy of our collapse was not the result of military defeat, nor did it result from the terrible peace itself, nor from the oppression that resulted, nor from our lack of weapons and defensive ability, nor even from everything that happened in Germany in the long years that followed. The real tragedy was that everything that happened was our own fault. Up to the very last minute, millions of Germans not only failed to understand, but, on the contrary, even welcomed the fact. Hundreds of thousands cheered our defeat, and millions praised the fact that we were without weapons. Others saw our oppression by the enemy as a just judgment, the result of a just punishment. That was the tragic misfortune, the terrible sickness that afflicted us. A large part of the German people no longer had any sense of the misfortune of their fatherland. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna have to say, I'm pretty sure they all had a sense of the misfortune of their fatherland. Like they were suffering, basically, you know, having to ration everything all the time, having to deal with nonstop air raid sirens. I think they were just sick of it, man. They acting like, oh, they just didn't know any. Oh, of course they were fucking experiencing all of this. You think they're not part of the fatherland? Shows you what dictators like this schmuck think of the people. That leads to the fundamental question on which the fate of the German nation will depend. Is it possible in Germany to reach the masses who no longer believe in their ethnicity, but rather see their brother more in their enemy than in their racial comrades who are of a different... Wait. Okay, wait. Hang on, I gotta... Okay. I'm trying to make... This sentence always confused me. Is it still possible in Germany to reach the masses who no longer believe in their ethnicity, but rather see their brother more in their enemy than in their racial comrades who are of a different party or worldview? And will it be possible to lead this great mass back to a united people's community, yes or no? Okay, wait, I think I get it. Okay, I think I get what he's saying. Is it still possible in Germany to reach the masses who no longer believe in their ethnicity? Okay, that's pretty obvious. He's asking, like, can you reach Germans in Germany who don't feel proud to be German, but rather see their brother more in their enemy than in their racial comrades who are of a different party or worldview? So basically, a hypothetical German who feels more aligned with, I don't know, someone in France or Belgium than with one of his fellow Germans because his fellow German is of a different party or worldview. All right? And will it be possible to lead this great mass back to a united people's community? Okay, so then taking this group of, I guess, whatever the Nazi equivalent of lumpen proletarian is, and bringing them back into the fold of, well, a quote-unquote people's community. Okay, that was all one sentence. Maybe it makes more sense in German. If this question cannot be answered in the right way, the German nation is lost. Peoples can perish. It is nonsense to think that a great people of 60 or 70 million is immortal. It dies if it loses its desire to preserve itself. Today, 18 million people in the German Reich still believe that the right of our people to live on this earth does not depend on its survival as such, but rather that it depends on some sort of fantastic opinion coming from others, such as Marxism. Wait. Okay, wait. Hang on. Today, 18 million people in the German Reich still believe that the right of our people to live on this earth does not depend on its survival as such, but rather that it depends on some sort of fantastic opinion coming from others, such as Marxism. Okay, wait. Okay, so 18 million people currently in Germany don't believe that Germans are a single ethnic group who have to fight for survival. I really can't understand what this is saying. I'll just leave it on the screen for a little bit. Maybe somebody in the audience can tell me what it means. Maybe it makes more sense in German. 10 million nationally minded people face 18 or 20 million anti-nationally minded people. 10 million who are ready to give all for their national heritage and who always measure justice by the survival of their nation, facing 18 to 20 million people who have forgotten that. That is the... Actually, wait. Where did he get those numbers from? Now that I think about it. Like, assuming he's right that there are 28 million people in Germany, give or take. Well, I guess he wouldn't be including kids, but let me think. Yeah, he's probably pulling those numbers out of his ass. This is the misery of the German people. As long as this condition lasts and endures, to believe in renewed freedom for the German people is utopian. Why? First, what was the real reason for our collapse? Just a reminder, Hitler opened the speech by talking about how he didn't want to talk about the past. Just reminding you. We collapsed because for years during the Old Reich, we committed serious domestic sins. We denied the Reich the means it needed to maintain itself. We collapsed because, for a long time, we entrusted the holiest matters of the whole nation to parliamentary maneuvering, because millions were no longer ready and willing to give their all for the preservation of their own nation and fatherland, but rather were determined to sacrifice their nation and their fatherland for the existence of their party. You know, this is like peak irony right here, considering just how much damage to Germany Hitler eventually caused in the name of, well, preserving his party. And of course, he even failed at that in the end. We collapsed because the overwhelming majority of citizens was pacifist, anti-national, and Okay, wait. We collapsed because the overwhelming majority of citizens was pacifist, anti-national, and Marxist, unwilling to give the state what it needed to preserve itself. Okay, I know this is literally Hitler we're talking about, you know, that dude red-baited to hell and back, but like, and I know he's making this shit up. Okay, like, I know he's making this shit up, but I just can't help but ask, where the hell did you get the Marxist adjective from? Like, he explained earlier where he was getting pacifist and anti-national from, but Marxist, that just came well out of freaking left field. Then again, knowing this guy's audience, everything left of center was communist, you know. I'd like to say my mommy's a commie because she's left-handed. Second, we collapsed internationally since those abroad knew our domestic weaknesses only too well. They knew the Achilles heel of the German Reich, knowing only too well the balance of power in Parliament. They knew well that any policy of active self-preservation would fail against the majority of half-heartedness, cowardice, and stupidity in this land. You know, France and England also had parliaments. Is he implying that Germany didn't do a good job at studying the parliaments of those nations? Heck, Germany also had a king, or a Kaiser. I will say I don't know exactly how the German government of the kind of pre-World War I and World War I era worked, but I thought they invested a lot of authority into the Kaiser. I could be wrong. Today, just as in 1918, the question is this: can this condition be changed? After the revolution in 1918, any attempt to revive Germany seemed hopeless. Internationally, Germany had fallen from its former heights, and at home it was torn apart. Almost the entire economy gradually came under the control of foreigners. Any thinking person back then had to realize that, if these developments continued, Germany would surely perish from international poisoning. International poisoning. It's like, yes, you have your regular poisoning, you got arsenic, the classics, you got, I don't know, radium if you want to die from radiation. Also, international poisoning. Like, what's that? Oh, we just take a bunch of rocks from everywhere in the world, grind them up, and make you drink them. And like, how is that deadly? Well, you're literally drinking a lot of filthy rocks. There's probably something toxic in there somewhere. There no longer seemed to be any hope of improvement. One had to ask if anyone was able to break the hold of this international power over the broad masses. My German racial comrade... It's just such an awkward choice of words. At least in English. My German racial comrades, the organized power of the Internationale reached from the left wing of the Center Party to the most left wing of Marxism. Only a very weak political force stood against it, the German bourgeoisie. Now see, this is the beautiful far-right BS that you hear shades of today in America even. There's this idea of, oh yeah, the leftists, they control, you know, all the levers of power that matter. They control the left-wing parties who are way, way too left. They also control the center political forces. Oh, and the only people who really stand a chance, or not stand a chance, who are actually fighting are just the wimpy, soft, rich guys. Like, this is the and you know what, I can say neo-Tillmanite because, you know, Tillman was dead at this point. Like, this is that same neo-Tillmanite fucking bullshit that drives me up a fucking wall, alright? Like, in the case of Tillman, it was, Let me think off the top of my... Yeah, it was, instead of Jews, rather it was the New England industrialists and the New York bankers. And surprisingly, Tillman didn't refer to the New York bankers as Jews in any way or shape or form that I'm familiar with. But, you know, they were basically using their carpetbaggers to control the African Americans of the state, to then attack the good, God-fearing whites. And, of course, the elites of South Carolina were just dudes and dandies, too soft, too effeminate to really do anything. So you needed a strong leader, or a big, strong, tough guy, to take back what was rightfully the white population's fucking vey. Why could the bourgeois parties, relatively small in numbers and size, and which lacked energy and an attacking spirit both in 1918 and afterwards, no longer change... Excuse me. No longer change the situation? I will briefly give you the reasons. First, the recognition of the principle of majority rule in Parliament ensured that only a majority of people could change things. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. The bourgeois parties, however, could no longer win such a majority. They themselves did not have a majority, for the bourgeois organized themselves primarily according to their intellectual and material standing, by how much they owned and how intelligent they were. Only a minority in the world have either. A political movement based on these two foundations must remain in the minority, and therefore is condemned to insignificance in a system in which the majority alone has power. See, it's right there. It's like, oh, yeah, you know, the elites are just soft and weak. What do they care about the commoners? What do they know about the commoners? Second, the path to power was forever closed to the bourgeois parties, since the sins of their fathers were vested on the children. What earlier generations ruined over long decades became the cause for the eternal desire for revenge. For a long time, the misery of the broad masses was ignored. Nobody worried about them. For years, no one saw the injustice. Ask yourself, 60 or 70 years ago, what party worried about these people? Which party went into the factories, the workplaces, or the streets? No one from the bourgeois movements. They all avoided the broad masses. Only when the masses began to organize themselves politically to win equal rights and Jewry cleverly took control did those on the political right begin to see that a new power within the state had begun to assert itself, a new fourth class. What was the fourth class? Wait, let me think. I remember, at least in my French Revolution classes, it talked about, the three estate systems. But, yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know what he means by a fourth class. If anyone in the audience knows what he means, please let me know. For too many decades, they had not noticed these racial comrades. They did not know them and had lost any instinct for understanding them. You see, that's that word again, instinct. Remember in that Robert Lay speech I did when Lay talked about the importance of racial instinct and all that jazz? That fixation on instinct. The result was that an unbridgeable chasm developed within the German people that would inevitably lead to disaster. Snobbery on the one side faced organized class insanity on the other. Snobbery can lead only to organized class thinking on the other side. The masses were systematically incited by those people who, by God, had no desire to bring blessings to the masses, but rather saw the masses only as a way to advance their own interests. Okay, if anyone ever asks you what psychological projection is, just point to that paragraph. Because, this is literally Hitler here we're talking about. Do you think Hitler gave a hoot about anyone other than himself, about whatever way he could use to gain power for himself and his cronies? Anyone who says that, Hitler loved Germany in their best Morty voice, no, Hitler loved himself. He saw himself as the embodiment of Germany. Anything he said about loving Germany was really just him stroking his own ego. Just the same Jew who on the one side gifted the bourgeoisie with the worst customs, the same Jew whipped up and agitated the masses, and he took each mistake that either side committed and presented it to the other in a manner distorted and magnified 1,000-fold. The same Jew, a capitalist tyrant, drove the masses to desperation, and then exploited this desperation on the other side until the masses were finally ready to be his instrument. Fucking vey,
This is some beautiful shit right there. Like, this whole Jews are responsible for both capitalism and communism. At some point later in the speech, he talks about how the inevitable end goal of Judaism, or rather Jewry, is Bolshevism or communism. But basically, rather, oh no, it's not that people are unhappy with capitalism, it's just that, well, the Jews are deliberately provoking the bourgeoisie into being snobs, and then tricking the bourgeoisie into acting like snobs. Then those same Jews are whipping up the broad masses of factory workers. Of course, this is literally Hitler we're talking about. This dude cannot imagine that, hey, even hypothetically speaking, that Jews can have different social classes. They can have different views. No, like, in his mind, he views everything through this racial and conspiratorial lens, and that, well, various racial groups are supposed to act in a concerted bloc that is controlled by some sort of leadership. I fucking vey. Like, seriously, just think about it for even a second, alright? You have, I guess, rich capitalist Jews and rich communist Jews, isn't part of a communist revolution involving, deadly attacks and killing the upper classes? If these Jews worked, like, in concert with one another to bring about Bolshevism, then why would the poor Jews basically deliberately risk the lives of their employers? And again, I'm sure Hitler and his cronies would argue that, oh, you see, they make sure to spare the other Jews who are rich, but that's just complete and utter bullshit. But the bourgeoisie lacked the one other thing that is necessary to win over the masses, and that is the most important reason why it never found contact with its people. The key to the hearts of the masses is not begging, but rather strength. I don't know exactly what the begging is, and every time I try to close this bottle, it, like, hisses a bit. That's gonna be fun to edit out, assuming I even can. That's the fizzy stuff for you. Can the microphone even hear the hiss? Oh well. It lacked the strength that is alone able to win over the masses of a people, namely fanatic faith and fanatic conviction, the relentless pursuit of an ideal, and above all, the knowledge that when one is pursuing a just cause, duty requires one to use every means one has. The bourgeois parties are born clubs of pacifists. That means that they lack not only the strength to attack and the will to attack, but also any ability to attack. He who desires to change a situation has to attack himself, not wait until he is attacked. That was the greatest failing of these bourgeois political organized movements. They never attacked, but rather were always happy when they were not themselves attacked. So, yeah, basically, it's the same neo-Tillmanite bullshit. It's like, oh, the old school elites, they're just too weak and effeminate and snobbish. And at the same time, oh, the left is so well-organized and well-funded. Oh, it's only us, the common people who are conservative and right-wing. We're the real victims. We need to be more like them. I fucking vey. That same, like, style of rhetoric, that same, I think, asabiya, for lack of a better word. They never had the courage to say, there is our goal, there is the enemy, down with him, only when the last of our enemies has been defeated is our victory sure. No, they were satisfied if fate did not treat them too unkindly in the next Reichstag election. If they were able to save a dozen seats, and they hoped that in the end, maybe their opponent in the coming years would make mistakes as big as they had made, so that the people would weary of them and the movement could win 9 new seats, which would be a tremendous success. That is what these movements were fighting for. Of course they were unable to attack. They were too tied to their possessions, whether intellectual or material, which always weakens the will to attack. But they wanted nothing more. They were too well brought up, too refined. The bad smells of a mass meeting make these gentlemen uncomfortable. They do not love beer halls, and still find it unpleasant today when the beer halls begin to consider larger issues, although one might ask, which is really the better of the two, a parliamentary meeting room or a beer hall? It's just weird hearing the word beer hall, or it's two words rather. The words beer hall just repeated so many times. They are too refined to attack. How many times has he said that? Like, they were too refined to attack. And finally, they are unable to attack because they are led by the same power that leads their opponents. Do you really believe that any of these bourgeois movements, always led from behind the scenes by Hebrews, could ever find the strength to attack the left, which is of course a brother party of a different color? No, dear God, no. Oh, yes. Of course, like, everything I don't like is controlled by Jews. How to argue is Hitler. Then again, it's of course even just this idea that, oh, Jews are always a single monolithic group who are always acting in concert with one another. Like, hypothetically speaking, even if there were rich and powerful Jewish leaders on the left and the right in this Weimar Republic era, so what? And in a sense, that's kind of the beauty of it. The idea that Hitler's not exactly saying, not giving all the details, it's supposed to be up to the listener to interpret their own conclusions. Of course, the correct conclusion being something akin to all the Jews are working together to try to create some sort of communist hellhole. And that resonated with enough people, I guess. They shake each other's hands and get along well enough. Only during elections is there a battle. Never one about principles, but rather only a stink about seats in Parliament. They would welcome a way to avoid battle, were there a way that seemed reasonable, if the left was agreeable, but it wants a fight. You see, this is like almost word for word the exact same rhetoric you hear in America. Like, these right-wing assholes are basically like, oh, the Democrats, they want to fight really hard. They want to trample us. They want to... I think it was like Trump who said, like, they're not coming after me. They're coming after you. I'm in the way. And it's basically like, have you looked at the freaking Democrats? Like, yeah, there are some, I guess, feisty fighter types. Fiery, feisty fighters, a lot of Fs. But by and large, they are the ones who are more than willing to make deals about stuff. But no, like, that doesn't fit into the perpetual victimhood complex, the need to feel aggrieved and victimized by a nebulous left-wing establishment that controls all the levers of power that really matter. What are left and right but two sides of the same coin that both point left anyway, huh? Ay, fucking vey. But the most important reason that the bourgeoisie could never win over the masses was that its political movements had no fundamentally new worldview. My German racial comrades, I'm too annoyed to even laugh at that. This is the most significant and important fact. When a movement is fighting to advance, and when it has a certain goal, that goal also gives the movement a milestone that everyone can see. One knows one has been successful when it reaches this goal. That does not end a struggle prematurely, for the movement will be driven on to new goals. The situation is the opposite when one is on the defensive. One is passive. Who can say when the goal has been reached? In the most favorable situation, when a position seems secure. That is the difference between the bourgeois parties and those to the left. The bourgeois movements fight to keep what they have. The left fights for the victory of its program, for the realization of its goals. The goal, however, is the collapse of the fatherland, the destruction of the nation, the ruination of the national economy, and the establishment of international Jewish financial hegemony. Yes, you know, nothing quite says radical leftist like joining an international banking cabal. But of course, these neo-Tillmanites don't give a flying fuck. No, they just need to feel victimized by a nebulous left-wing establishment that... Maybe a better way to word it would be like nebulous left-wing establishment that encompasses everything they don't like, regardless of whether or not it's actually left-wing. And no, that's not a better way to word it. That is so freaking long, oy vey. That was the weakness of Germany's political bourgeoisie. It had nothing to offer to combat the other side's brutal goal of destroying all values, including that of race. It's the same general idea. Oh, the left will destroy everything you hold near and dear. For that reason, the bourgeois battle against Marxism was doomed to fail. However, we must all realize this. Marxism, whether in the form of social democracy or communism, social democracy is Marxism now. This is almost like word for word that same fucking conservative shit you hear in America, where it's like, oh, you want a decent welfare state? That's literally communism. It's like, what's that? You want a union? You know who else wanted a union? Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin. What are you, a fucking commie? And it's this general thing. It's like, everyone who disagrees with me is a communist. And it's of course, but the communists control, it's the media. Or what was it, like, in that George Wallace vid idea? It was like, oh, it's the communist menace, the left-wing menace who controls the media, and they want to call us bigots because they want to smear us. Yeah, no, you can't possibly be wrong. Absolutely everyone else is just a communist out to get you. Like, this mindset, it never fucking changes. Honestly, I think we on the left need to tackle that by just pointing out the absurdity of it, the fact that everything is a communist plot to these fuckers, and that mindset just resonates with a lot of people. I think more people really need to be aware of that, of the absurdity of it, because a lot of people are just unaware of the absurdity of it and how long it's lasted. However, we must realize this. Marxism, whether in the form of social democracy or communism, can be defeated as long as it faces a doctrine of greater truthfulness, but with the same brutal methods. Such a doctrine, however, must always be rooted in the broad masses. Only there can one find the resolute fighters who are ready to give all for their ideals. The broad masses are not so rich in intellectual or material possessions as to keep them from fighting for a distant goal. Only the broad masses move forward. Only they are willing to sacrifice. Therefore, every movement on earth that is not rooted in them is doomed to failure. Each movement, on the other hand, that reaches, gathers, and organizes the lower classes and leads them to battle, can and will be victorious.
The Jew understood this, and that is why he organized the broad masses. That is why, even though he avoids all practical labor... Okay. Yeah, sure. Practical labor. You know, this shit reminds me of, like, the folks who will say things like, oh, if you're poor, it's because you're lazy. And then you say to them, like, well, I mean, a lot of poor people are working, multiple jobs or very hard at some sort of entry-level job that's thankless and nobody gives a shit about. And they'll say, oh, no, you gotta get a real job. Like, seriously, who or what determines what counts as a quote-unquote real job? I can never get a decent explanation of this. I mean, people will point to factory work as jobs that they deem worthy of supporting a family on, but one interesting fact is that factory work, at least in the U.S., used to be the crappy job that we would give to immigrants. There was this old joke that the foreman at the Ford Motor Plant had to know how to say hurry up in 20 different languages. Really, it wasn't until we unionized the workplaces that a lot of these once dead-end jobs became decent enough to support a family on. But of course, these right-wing fucknuts hate unions too. Okay. He went into the factories to lie and lie, and since he is the virtuoso of lies... Okay, you know what? That part, the virtuoso of lies, just keep that in your back pocket. Okay, yes, this is literally Hitler. The guy was like, I promise I will not invade Czechoslovakia. Oops, I invaded Czechoslovakia. I promise I will not invade Poland. Oop, I invaded Poland. I promise I will not invade the Soviet Union. Oop, I invaded the Soviet Union. God, I cannot do a good German accent. Finally succeeded in presenting himself as the benefactor of the masses. He brought them together, learned their wishes, and promised the satisfaction of every wish, thus forging an army of millions of strong fists that he then used his intelligence to lead. The Jew, in brilliant ways, saw what the bourgeoisie had overlooked. It is kind of interesting that Hitler is quite literally describing his own strategy. It's go to the lower classes, lie and lie and lie, then create an army that you can use to fulfill your will. He understood that earth-shaking ideas can only be realized if they are supported by millions of people in the lower classes of a people. Cleverly and systematically, he transformed this idea into reality by organizing countless workers and thus forged a powerful mass of people together, using them to destroy the backbone of the national state, to ruin the national economy, to wipe out its racial foundations, and to establish his dictatorship. Like, come on, this is like perfect projection. This is literally Hitler we're talking about, complaining about how the Jews are lying to the masses of people, organizing them to fulfill their wishes, and then creating a dictatorship out of them. Like, that is literally Hitler complaining about other people doing it. And that's the beauty of fascism. Like, in fascism, hypocrisy is a virtue. Well, I guess in authoritarianism in general. It's this idea that I am special, I am unencumbered by things like, my own morals. I am unencumbered by things like, it can even get to the point of reality itself. Same with, like, the fucking QAnon folks who were just unencumbered by reality by basically claiming that, oh, the storm will happen any day now, and honestly, the idea of the storm terrifies me. Like, how do I word this properly? Not necessarily, like, I know the storm's never going to happen. The storm being a mythical event in which Donald Trump and the military and armed forces will basically launch a coup and imprison all of Trump's political enemies. But it's the fact that so many Americans want that. The fact that there's a disturbingly large amount of Americans who really want a strongman dictator to just take the armed forces and overthrow a democratically elected system, despite the many flaws in America's democratic institutions. But the fact that so many Americans just want that really disturbs me. I ask you, do you believe that this situation will change by chance, or do you believe that when one sees inevitable catastrophe coming, one has the duty, the right, to demand of each individual that he fight against it with all the strength at his command, even, in the end, to go on the attack himself? This is what moved us all the way back when we founded the National Socialist German Workers' Party. The goal then was clear and simple, to fight the devil's forces that had plunged Germany into this misery, to fight Marxism along with the other intellectual carriers of this world plague and epidemic, the Jews. We did not want to fight in the bourgeois manner carefully so that one does not get hurt. No, and no again. Okay, I mean, he was honest about that. A lot of people did get hurt. I mean, yep, take that line out of context. Oh, Hitler was right. A lot of people got hurt by his methods. As we joined together in this new movement, one thing was clear to us. There were only two possible outcomes. Either the enemy would walk over our corpses, or we would walk over his. Well, the Nazis did create a lot of corpses. The battle against the world plague would not be won by gaining several seats in parliament, but rather it would be assured only when the swastika flag flew over the last workplace and the last factory, and the last Soviet star, whether opened or concealed, had disappeared. Okay, like, maybe it's a translation thing, but if something is concealed, wouldn't you be able to argue that it's disappeared? You know what, my editor, he knows German, he can probably explain that to me. From the very first days, we knew that the movement had to follow two principles. To make a cause understandable to the broad masses, one must fight both it and the people who represent it. Remember England's brilliant propaganda preparations for the war against us? Whom did England fight against? The person of the German Kaiser, and against militarism. Whom is Jewry fighting through its Marxist forces? Against the bourgeoisie as individuals, and against quote-unquote capitalism. No, seriously, like, the translation here has capitalism in quotes. I don't know why. Who was our movement to fight? Against the Jew as a person and against Marxism. First, we had to concentrate the whole strength of the movement on a single goal, and that for pragmatic reasons. If one wants to accomplish an important goal, one must have the masses on his side, but the mass of people is infinitely varied. Each individual has certain opinions, certain abilities, a certain temperament, a liking for some things and a dislike for others. It is hard enough to find a goal for 10,000 people, but even harder to find a goal for these 10,000 that consists of 16 or 20 smaller goals. Imagine that you stand before a small group and say, "We are fighting the Jews and the Marxists." That group will perhaps go along with you. Now imagine a second goal. "We are fighting for this or that as well." Now this will offend someone or other, who will say, "I cannot go along with that." If you now add a third goal, someone else will object, and so on, if you add a fourth, and so on. Once you have a list of 20 goals, there may be 5 people left who agree with all 20 goals. Therefore, it is pragmatically necessary to focus on one goal, unifying as large a mass of people as possible behind it, and with them begin a unified attack. Second, it is psychologically wrong to set several goals. A person is inclined to look for reasons in every instance. The German people, especially inclined to hyper-objectivity, is always ready to ask, "Do I have the right to do that? Or does my opponent have more justice on his side than I do?" I love the part was like the German people, especially inclined to hyperobjectivity. That's like the classic salesman technique where it's like, oh, you're here to buy my product. You must be a smart individual with discerning taste if you're coming to buy my product. Look around Germany today and pick 10 enemies as your target. 90 of 100 Germans immediately will say, can these 10 be wrong and only us right? If you pick 20 goals, people will be even more tortured by the question, everyone else is wrong and only we are right? Our people always looks to the rights of others, not to its own self-preservation. That line right there. Our people always looks to the right of others, not to its own self-preservation. I'm kind of fascinated by what this line implies. Like, this line implies that it is impossible for more than one group of people to exist within a certain area at any given time. The implication is that if another group exists, then they must be getting their right to exist from our group, or I guess a better way to word it. You have Group A and Group B. If Group A allows Group B to live, then Group B is inherently taking rights from Group A somehow. God damn, this zero-sum mindset. To the degree that you add goals, the confidence, the faith of the individual sinks, hurting the strongest foundation that a person can have, namely the conviction that he is fighting for justice. That is the issue. If human beings and peoples are to be strong, they must be convinced that they are fighting for an entirely just cause. That is why it is necessary to have only a few goals and to choose an enemy that everyone can see. There is the guilty one, him alone. The Allies understood that brilliantly. They did not say that they were fighting Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Turkey, and so forth, but rather they always said, we are fighting only the Kaiser and militarism. Whether they were fighting in Mesopotamia, Russia, France, Serbia, or somewhere else, it was always the Kaiser and militarism. That is how they brought 26 states into the war against Germany. Imagine how strengthened the confidence of each Englishman. He could tell himself, can we be wrong when it is 26 against 1? On our side, on the other hand, the average man could ask, can we be right when there are 26 against us? Can all 26 be wrong? Believe me. I always love it, like when a demagogue's like, believe me. Yeah. Particularly with a people like the Germans, it is absolutely necessary for psychological reasons to pick one enemy and march against him. When necessary, one can make several enemies when referring to one. Besides these two reasons, for focusing on one enemy, there are others. The most important one is that the goal... Wait. I gotta go back a second. When necessary, one can mean several it can mean several enemies when referring to one. Okay. For a second, I thought he said one can refer to several enemies, and I was a bit confused, like, wait, aren't you only supposed to have one enemy? But no, he's saying you can, like, even if you have more than one enemy, you need to lump them together in one big category. Okay. Besides these two reasons for focusing on one enemy, there are others. The most important one is that this goal is a vital question of survival for the German nation. Do not be deceived by the dangers that people always try to present as more pressing ones. The greatest danger we face is and remains the poison of foreign peoples in our national body. All other dangers are of limited duration. Only this one has eternal consequences. Many are speaking of new goals for the movement and fail to see the forest for the trees. They suddenly believe that it is necessary to fight 15 or 20 opponents. In the midst of this confusion of goals, I ask you only to think of Berlin, to look at Friedrichsthal. Excuse me. I guess that's an area of Berlin. There you will see one Jewish lad after another with his arm around a German girl. Of course, it's always that, oh, they're coming for our innocent women. Like, it's this idea of, treating women as just a piece of property, but also this inability to accept, hey, maybe a woman likes a man of a different ethnic group. Heck, maybe a man likes a woman of a different ethnic group. Like, hey. Then remember that every night thousands and thousands of people of our blood are destroyed forever in a single moment, their children and grandchildren lost to us. And remember this, one can break peace treaties, reparations can be cancelled or rejected, political parties can be dealt with. Talk about foreshadowing. Considering Hitler was infamous for just breaking the treaties that he signed, it's one of those things you really don't expect him to literally lay that out for you, especially this early. Well, I guess in hindsight it does make sense if you have an ego that big. But blood that has once been poisoned cannot be changed. It remains, it spreads, and harms us more and more each year. If you wonder about the current fragmentation of our people, remember this. The inner discord of the German people is the result only of mixed blood. You know, I mean, yeah, sure. Sure, whatever. Yeah, the only reason there are problems in Germany is because there are people of different ethnic groups and racial groups having babies. This is genius, isn't it? Genus, genius. That is the greatest danger. If this poisoning continues, we will be weaker in 10, 20, or 30 years than we are today. Weaker in 100 years than we will be in 30. Weaker in 200 years than we will be in 100. And the time will come when our people loses its high cultural standing and we will perish from blood poisoning. Everything beautiful that we see around us is the result of the Aryan, of his spirit and industry. Only the bad is the gift of the Hebrews. Okay, now that is sheer freaking copium right there. It's just like... It's just like, yes, everything good in the world is because of me. Everything bad is because of you. Like, that's gotta be one of the stupidest fucking things I have heard. And I'm literally reading a Hitler speech full of dumb shit. But that is like a freaking 5-year-old talking about how much better he is than his older sister. And we will lose the strength we will need to rebuild, not only in the cultural, but also in the physical realm. If the German people does not master this plague, it will perish from it. The art of a greater popular leaders has always been to concentrate the attention of the masses on one enemy. Only thus can one build the surge of passion necessary for every major success. Believe me when I say that the understanding plays only a minor role here. The right feeling is more important than all understanding. Understanding can deceive people. Sure feeling never does. Okay. Yeah, no, that's just fucking wrong. And remember earlier when I mentioned him talking about the Jews as the virtuoso of lies and to keep that in your pocket? Keep it, this is where I want you to bring it up, okay? Because Hitler is quite literally saying you don't need to focus on the understanding or the knowledge, but you need to focus on your feeling and your gut. Which basically means that the only way that they know that Jews are the virtuoso of lies is because they feel it, that they just know it to be correct, and that if they try to... And he's basically acknowledging, oh, if you understand it, you're going to be deceived. Just go with your feeling and obey me. Like... I mean, you are, like, just taking this part right here. Like, it's extremely telling that if you were around back then and you were listening to this and agreeing with it, then holy fuck, you had to have already had a fucking poisoned mind. If you were so desperate to feel justified in your hatred of another group of people that you were literally like cheering and agreeing to a guy who said, oh, don't actually think about why you hate someone, just experience the hatred and roll with it. Just feel the hatred and know that you are correct in your feeling. And that anyone who tries to, and if you try to understand it, then you're going to be deceived. And holy fuck, it just, I mean, holy fucking shit. Like, I will say, I do understand that some people who are charismatic, they're very good at, you know, saying a lot of words without really saying anything, but at the same time, you feel good for listening to them, and you just feel right to agree with them. But this is one of those things that's like, if you, like, really took the time to just listen to this when he said it, or even, considering how the Nazis love to print their speeches, just read it and took the time to think about it, do you think that would have set off alarm bells in anyone's head? What do I know? Well, I guess I could say I know some stuff, but I can't speak for what everyone in the Weimar Republic era was thinking. Understanding can deceive people, sure feeling never does. It is not by chance that you see so many women in our movement, and here in this hall, even though our movement fights in the most manly way. You see them here because feelings dominate in women and tell women the future of our children is at stake, and therefore the future of our race. There is no wavering, no confusion the next day when some bookworm invents some scientific reason as to the contrary. No, feelings are stable. They do not waver or weaken. Oh, come on. Feelings can be unstable as fuck, dude. I mean, let's be real here. I'm sure anyone who spent enough time with Hitler would realize just how unstable feelings and emotions could be. A certain Dr. Heim may talk about our hysterical women. Okay, truth be told, I really couldn't find much about who Dr. Heim was. Women brought Christianity to the nations and will also, in the end, lead our movement to lasting victory. If she is not there, not only the woman is lacking, but also the youth and therefore the future. You can be sure that the movement with the fewest women also has the least strength. That is why, for example, you find only a few ladies in the Democratic parties. If one agrees that a movement has to pursue one goal, he must also agree that everything has to be subject to a single thought. Okay, I mean, yeah, I guess if you already have that authoritarian mindset, you only want everyone to have one thought, all right? This should be symbolically expressed in its name. That is why we chose the name National Socialist German Workers' Party. We chose National Socialist because the supreme goal of the movement embodies the connection between living national strength and the purest social goals. We were convinced that the hearts of the masses could never be won through shouting Heil alone. They had to be persuaded that our people's movement was interested in each individual and that we were not handing out gifts, but rather that we wanted to establish justice. And that we saw the future of our people not in a one-sided, highly bred intelligentsia, but rather in a healthy people. You know, it's like just a vague concept of the people as a single monolithic group. And it is kind of interesting how earlier Hitler is able to point out that, hey, people as individuals are heavily varied. They have their own likes and dislikes, their own needs and wants and desires. And yet he continually refers to the people as just a single monolithic group. Well, I mean, I don't expect this to make sense when you think about it, considering that would be understanding, and understanding is deceptive. Ay vey. And we are a German workers' party. We welcome only those who are not ashamed to say, I too am a worker, a productive human being. He who cannot say this word with respect, by God, has not yet learned how to be the best sort of German. And that is why we chose the swastika as our symbol, on a white circle against a red background. The symbol emphasized our single goal. The swastika is a symbol of labor, the white a symbol of our national sentiments, and the red a symbol of our true socialist thinking. The cross, however, has another meaning, the spirit of labor on this earth, which is the spirit of Aryan idealism, not the spirit of the Jew. You know, like, it's impressive. He's basically like, oh yeah, this minority group, they're also, like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's like, oh, on the one hand, they're lazy and not working. On the other hand, they're taking your jobs. And actually, from what I recall, Hitler doesn't mention Jews of taking the jobs of hard-working Germans. But he talks about how they eschew all practical labor, and, you know, he's just incapable of accepting that, hey, they're ordinary people living ordinary lives. Sure, there are some who are very rich. There are some very rich people of every ethnic group. And the majority of them are working-class schlubs like you and me. It is, therefore, the symbol under which we fight this world plague, this world poisoning. Our attitude toward Parliament flowed from this attitude. Our attitude toward Parliament flowed from this attitude. Use attitude twice in the same sentence. Why did we reject Parliament back then? The young movement wanted to train fighters, not become parliamentarians. The movement was convinced that it was too early to go into such places. It thought that, just as today, we needed speakers, agitators, and apostles to speak to the masses, to spread the new doctrine, to attempt to win over the masses, to organize them, to win new strongholds, to strengthen and expand the movement. Our program was to be a logical expansion of this tendency. It was a guiding star, freeing us from the question, what do you want to do tomorrow or the day after tomorrow? It was to determine the direction of the movement for decades to come. Its ideas were ethical, immortal, imperishable, able to enlighten people in distant centuries. I mean, first off, ethical. These are the literal Nazis. I don't think any definition of ethics was really in their vocabulary. Immortal. Well, okay, let's be real here. The Nazi swastika and the Nazi movement are effectively immortalized in history. As imperishable. Yeah, they are. I mean, it does take a lot of effort to be the go-to bad guys in just history in general, and able to enlighten people in distant centuries. Yes, it's almost 100 years later at this point in 2022. Actually, it's just about 100 years later from... when was this speech given? Let me double check real fast. No, I said it at the beginning. I just don't remember what it was at the top of my head. Okay, so 1925. So yeah, it is almost 100 years later. And, well, yeah, it's basically teaching a lot of people what not to do. However, some people just seem to love the rhetoric of victimhood and oppression and that feeling of being aggrieved and victimized by a nebulous left-wing establishment. So I guess there's that, or whatever. Okay. Let's go back. Wait. Centuries. Control F. Okay. The carriers of these ideas, however, had to be human. We knew even then that the battle against Jewry could not be fought only against the race as such, but also against its living manifestation, individual persons. That is why we set the faith in the value of personality over against the Jewish thinking of majority rule. That is why we set the faith in the value of personality over against the Jewish thinking of majority rule. Maybe that's a typo or something. But the thing that fascinates me is that Jews are a minority. And so wait. So earlier Hitler was talking about how Jews will manipulate the masses, and apparently since the Jews are so good at manipulating the masses, they want majority rule on those grounds, on the grounds that they can manipulate the majority. However, Hitler wants to control the masses in his own way, but that is not majority rule, but at the same time it is also the will of the German people. Is it really hard to see why he doesn't want people to understand what he's saying? He just wants them to feel it. That is how our movement began its labors. It wanted to do what the bourgeois parties had failed to do. Above all, it wanted to reach the masses, spreading true national feelings. It's kind of interesting. He talks about how we love socialism, but he's also saying we want to do what the bourgeois parties had failed to do. So, it's like with that Robert Ley speech, when Robert Ley was like, nothing says socialism like starting up a business, and in this case, nothing says socialism quite like doing what the business parties failed to do. You know how well it succeeded. We began with nothing. 4.5 years later, our movement's name was on everybody's lips. The whole world has heard about us since then. Well, yeah, about 100 years later, just about everyone has heard of you. Then the tragic day came. You know all about it. On that bitter day, for the first time in the history of the young movement, people perished, thereby proving in the most vivid way their sacrificial spirit. The movement itself was banned, its organization dissolved. Only through hard effort did some attempt to continue the work, and many, many went to prison. Hey, remember at the beginning of the speech when he was like, I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm never going to get over that, A year has passed, and the movement is once again free. It is again free, which means we have the opportunity to rebuild everything again or to give up. Do not be surprised that I see only one way to proceed. Oh yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention. So he's talking about how it's bad that, our people died due to state authority and our people were penalized by the state. Again, this is literally Hitler. Everybody listening knows the sheer authority he wants to give the state. Well, he even mentioned it earlier. But at the same time, he wants the state to be used for his gains. It's the whole theme of popular elitism and neo-Tillmanism. They aren't mad that the system is rigged. No. They are mad that the system is not rigged in their favor. Why am I calling the old movement the old party to life once again? You know that there is evil, bitter strife today. Do not ask me to take sides in this strife. Oh, wait a second. Okay. Yeah, I was a bit confused by that thing and wait, Hitler didn't want to take sides. Then I realized, oh wait, he meant taking sides within inner party squabblings. Even today, I still see each party member as a supporter of our common idea. Even today, I still see not the individual before me, but rather a great thought. If I fall into doubt, I need only to close my eyes to see before me the hour in which thousands were ready, if necessary, to die for this idea. I've got aphantasia, so I don't know what that's like. Do not believe that I have forsaken this idea. It is my unshakable guiding star, now and forever. Anyone whom I believe shares even a part of this thinking is, in my eyes, my brother, and belongs once more in the old ranks. I do not see my task as leader of the new movement to investigate, to inquire, or to study the past. I see only one duty, namely to bring those who have gone different ways back together again. I could not do that were I to take sides in party conflicts. Therefore I have taken up the old flag once more, confident that it will bring together once more all those who share our thinking. The old flag must succeed once again in forming a single great living movement from the chaos we find ourselves in today. The old flag must again bring together the competing leaders and convince the masses that the movement is not dying, but rather that it is just beginning today. We have to do that today. More than ever before, the fate of Germany calls to us. Germans, be on guard and defend yourselves. Our people has slumbered over these last months. It will either have a rude awakening or it will not wake up at all. The old parties are rapidly collapsing. What are they fighting for? For ridiculous goals. How weak they are. They fight about everything. Are they to lead the German nation? They fight about everything. I mean, that's literally the fucking fascist ethos, is they need to always struggle and fight. Well, I guess in this context, it's more in the case of you need to fight people who we perceive as outsiders rather than each other. Let's see. How can a people survive this situation? I know that many feel this misery only when it affects their own pocketbooks. Believe me, that will happen again. The deceptive foundation of our current economy will vanish, and then people will perhaps understand what we are saying better than they do today. We need to remind people that when they were not worried in the past, we were already prophesying what would come to pass. You know, I mean, if you continually predict something is going to go wrong, or that a bunch of things are going to go wrong, sooner or later you're going to get it right. I think that's called shotgunning. Because, like, you know, if you shoot a shotgun a bunch of times at a target, well, some of your pellets are going to hit the bullseye. And as long as you ignore the ones that miss, you can act like you had a 100% perfect aim. Now, my dear party comrades, I come to a series of matters of principle. When yesterday I raised the flag of our old movement, I expected that all those who in their hearts had remained National Socialists would flock to me. I am not concerned about the great masses as such. In the past I swam against the powerful current for a long time. It is the same today. Whoever does not want to join our camp can stay away, but whoever wishes to join us, I say, the bickering is over. Do not come to me with reasons to keep it up. Do not come to me and say, I can do everything except this or that, and so has done many things wrong that I can never... No, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, but then have the courage to throw one at me too, for like every one of you I have made mistakes. No one has the right to beat his breast and say he is to blame, but I am as pure as the angels. You know, this is probably the only time you'll ever hear Hitler admitting to messing up at some point. He who thinks that way is the guiltiest. He is unjust and deceives himself. Oh, Hitler's describing himself. Today, people talk a lot about quote-unquote cooperating. The first prerequisite for cooperation is mutual understanding. The first prerequisite for understanding is forgiveness, and he who cannot forgive in my eyes is not worthy of being a part of our movement. You know, considering how brutal the Nazis were, this is an interesting little sentence, and it also continues to demonstrate that type of hypocrisy. The need to only forgive people within our group, but everyone else is basically free reign. Or maybe not free reign, up for grabs, or... Basically, you have to be able to forgive people in our group, but at the same time, folks who are outside our group must be dealt with in the harshest way possible. Do not come to me and say, yeah, sure, but my opinion is in the interests of our movement. Gentlemen, from now on, let me worry about the interests of the movement. You had 9 months to protect the interests of the movement. Many times in my cell I spent sleepless nights pacing back and forth, worrying about how the interests of the movement were being protected. I therefore ask that, from now on, everyone follow the path that I want to and will show him. I am not standing here to complain about someone, to insult someone, or to make some sort of mild reproach to anyone. I ask but one thing of you. Join the ranks of the old movement again and leave everything from the past in the past. I ask you to remember the great sacrifices many have made for the movement. I believe that, were the earth to give back those who fell on the 9th of November, they would stand beside me now and say to you, we did not want all this strife. We did not die for individuals, but for our great common faith and for our common labors. I speak to, above all, our German youth. You do not know if you will one day have to fight again for the freedom of the German fatherland. If you wish to once again visit the Rhine, and there's a footnote here for Rhine saying that the areas by the Rhine River were demilitarized as part of the Treaty of Versailles, do not go as individuals. Rather, march together shoulder to shoulder. Do that now in our movement as well. You know, like, reading through this speech, it is kind of interesting the way Hitler just varies between viewing people as individuals and viewing people as groups and blocks. The vibe I'm getting is that in his mind, every other group of people is basically a single monolithic block, and only the Germans are like have the mental capacity to even act as individuals, and that's apparently a bad thing. Like, that's the implication I'm getting from the way Hitler talks about both groups of people and individuals, at least within this speech. I turn to women. I ask you to be ruled by a single feeling, the feeling of obligation, which is the greatest treasure that we have. Care for it, preserve it, do not let it fall into the gutter. Every harsh word that we say to each other will be a weapon that our enemies can use against us. I believe that we have a symbol that can appeal to everyone. Our old flag has rested these last 15 months. Today it flies once more, and each can swear his oath to it once more. Everyone can join our ranks again. He who cannot do this can go his own way. Whoever thinks that he can join us with conditions does not know me very well. For 9 months I said nothing. Now I lead the movement, and no one can ask for conditions from me. If a person comes to me and says, I have this condition, and someone else comes to me with another condition, I have one answer. My friend, wait until I make the conditions. You know? Like, that specific part. Like, I know this is literally Hitler, and that, literally Hitler hated democratic anything and wanted absolute and total control. But, at least from an American perspective, that is kind of terrifying. Just this idea of, like, you don't have the ability to negotiate anything, my way or the highway, on everything. I am not willing to be restricted by conditions as long as I bear the responsibility. And once again, I bear the responsibility for everything that happens in this movement. Oh yeah, he bears the responsibility. That's definitely why he fucking killed himself. No, instead of owning up for, literally all the mayhem and horror he caused, instead of letting himself be captured, no, he had to kill himself because he was the one who bared so much responsibility. Give me a fucking break. Once again, I ask you to put aside everything that separates us, and remember that today, all of Germany is looking towards us. There are only 3,000 or 4,000 of us in this hall, but in a short while, 2 or 3 million must grow from these 4,000. The movement is entering a new year. I will call a provisional membership meeting, and it will elect the leadership. In the next year, we will then hold the first regular membership meeting. I ask you to refrain from all criticism until then, including criticism of me. We will see each other again in a year, and then you may judge. If I have done well, do not criticize me any longer. And if I have done badly, I will surrender my office back to you. So wait, don't criticize him for 1 year. Then during the next meeting, you have a brief window of time that you can criticize him. And then if you think he did a good job, do not criticize him anymore. Yeah, I'm sorry, that's like a shit deal right there. It's like, okay, no criticism for 1 year, then you get like, what, 2 days, 1 day, 2 days that you can openly criticize me, then never criticize me again. Ay, wees, man. Let's see. And if I've done badly, I will surrender my office back to you. I believe I can promise you today, however, that our movement will come to life again. I believe in our old flag. I designed it myself. I was the first to carry it. And my only wish is that, when the Grim Reaper finally strikes me down, that it will be my burial shroud. And I believe that you too do not want to desert this old flag, that you cannot desert it. Times today are grim. Our people dances while death nears. Our task is to walk into the swamp once more and tell people what they must be told. I believe that many eyes can be opened in the coming year. Many will see through the deceptive veil. And many who curse us today will be new fighters in our ranks. To win these people is your most important task. Yes, remove the veil of deception. Replace it with the veil of even thicker deception. Forget all internal bickering, even if others attack me. That is irrelevant. We do not want to fight about it. What we want to do is reach the masses, to rescue them from their present insanity and bring them back to their ethnic roots, so that one day Germany will rise more under our flag. That great thing, not the party, is our goal. When we put away our disagreements, we can more easily join the ideal that binds us together in a common value, our common, holy German fatherland. The speech ends here. I have read this speech a handful of times prior to making this recording. As difficult as the speech was for me to read to myself, I decided to make this video to discuss the feelings that Hitler was clearly trying to convey. It's one thing to just describe him as a man full of hatred, but it's another thing to dissect the hatred, lies, and rejection he disseminates through his rhetoric. The first thing I have to say, yet again, is that he begins his speech by saying that he is, quote, not here to give an account of the past, end quote. He then spends the bulk of this speech talking about the past. I really cannot get over that at all. The next thing I have to draw attention to is how surprisingly candid the speech was, both in what it said and what it did not say. It does a rather good job at laying out Hitler and the Nazi Party's views and attitude towards power, politics, and life in general. Nowadays, Hitler is infamous the world over for lying like a rug, and yet despite his many lies within this speech, he quite honestly lays out his, ideal. He explicitly speaks about how peace treaties can be broken and how they don't win power democratically, but rather take it by force. Perhaps the cornerstone of his views was the fixation on feelings over understanding. This sort of thing is far from unique to Hitler and can be found in fascist movements all over the place and all over the time. I remember from that book on Romania I've quoted in a previous video somewhere, there was a section that stuck out to me. Specifically the idea, and I quote, ultranationalists were quick to distinguish between justice as a fair recompense for moral actions and justice as the product of the legal system. The quote-unquote supreme law was not a written code, but rather common sense and human logic, end quote. And it is pretty obvious what Hitler is trying to say if you take that into account. He's trying to say that everybody already knows that he, and by proxy his followers, are right. Since everyone already knows it, nobody really has to demonstrate it or prove it or even understand why he and they are right. Since it's obvious, everyone knows it, it's just common sense. One thing that is obvious but can easily be overlooked is the way that Hitler and the Nazis viewed power, authority, and structures of power and authority and whatnot. I'm not here to give an account of the past. Now recall, if you will, my Robert Ley speech, in which Ley, the Nazi Minister of Labor, or whatever the equivalent position was in Nazi Germany, I don't remember the exact title and I don't feel like looking it up, he openly praised corporate structures. Specifically, he said, and I quote, open quote, "A firm is a unit that we will not touch. This is holy to us. The firm must remain unified. Firm leaders and workers should organize things themselves as much as possible. They should work things out and be comrades together," end quote. And in that same speech, he later says, and I quote, "Whether you are a worker or a manager, merchant or doorman, or errand boy, whether you are young or old, man or woman, all who are members of a firm share a common fate. Your fate is dependent on the success of this firm. When the firm operates well and earns money, everyone earns. And when the firm goes poorly, it does not go poorly for just one person, but for everyone. It is a living community of fate," end quote. Take note of this and then recall what Hitler said in his speech, and I quote, "The same Jew who on the one side gifted the bourgeoisie with the worst customs, this same Jew now whipped up and agitated the masses. And he took each mistake that either side committed and presented it to the other in a manner distorted and magnified 1,000-fold. It is immensely clear what Hitler and the Nazis like about capitalism and the status quo is the top-down autocratic structures that corporations have by default. Aside from shareholders having some voting rights, corporations are run as top-down autocracies where employees are supposed to obey the orders of their employers or managers, who are, agents of the employers, without hesitation or question, the exact type of leadership principle that Hitler adored. The difference, however, was that Hitler and other fascists did not like what they perceived as the quote-unquote Jewish elements of capitalism. The Nazis even used the terms schaffendes and raffendes Kapital, in which schaffendes Kapital was supposed to be the good, productive, Germanic Kapital, and the raffendes Kapital was exploitative, Jewish, and bad aspects of capitalism. And fascists, in general, they may use the rhetoric of anti-capitalism, but in the end, they'll do very little about the same excesses that they claim to want to curb. Rather, they tend to fall into this quasi-philosophy which says that the issue with capitalism is that the capitalist leaders are corrupted by a mindset of individuality. Rather than focus on their success, a business should subordinate itself to the interests of, quote-unquote, the people by working for the interests of the state. So long as these business authorities acted in the interests of the people, then everything would sort of
magically work itself out. You may recall Hitler saying, "Everything beautiful that we see around us is the result of the Aryan of his spirit and industry, only the bad is the gift of the Hebrews." For any schmucks in the audience who still want to argue that Hitler was left-wing because he had socialist in his party name, just keep this in mind. The Nazis loved the top-down autocratic structure of corporations. Through a magical thinking, they figured that these top-down autocratic structures would benefit the whole of the people, so long as those in control had a connection to the people, worked in the interests of the people, and were loved by the people. Of course, the inevitable question will be, how does one actually measure such things? To which I'll remind you that Hitler didn't want you to understand things, just know and feel them instinctually. And that desire for emotion is what he relied on. Hatred and opposition are powerful emotions, and he did a much better job at articulating what he was against rather than what he was for. Personally, I'm still struck by him asserting that social democracy was a form of Marxism. Then again, as a milquetoast social democrat in the USA, I'm basically Stalin 2.0. Seriously, like everything remotely left of center here gets smeared by the right-wing rage machine as a communist plot to take over America. It's like taxes for healthcare is big government communism, but we need more taxes for the military and police, otherwise you're a commie for opposing them. Oh, frickin' fake. You know what? No, I'm not here to give an account of the past, but I still remember for 8 long years when the GOP and further right-wing assholes called everything Obama did socialism, acting like he was the most radical left-wing president in our history. And then again, that's the thing. It's not really about opposition to Marxism as an ideology from any coherent or rational standpoint. It is, like Hitler said, aiming all your rage and contempt towards a single foe. It's taking all your insecurities, fears, and dislikes and wrapping them into one idea, Marxism, and one person or group of people, the Jews. And that's fascism in a nutshell, the Tillman cycle on crack, steroids, cocaine, uppers, and every other drug I didn't feel like listing. It takes people's fear and confusion about the complexity of reality and promises them a vague ideal of the future that they can feel as if they are a part of. They didn't care that social, economic, and governmental structures were unfair and oppressive. What bothered the Nazis is that they were not the ones in charge. Now, I'm not here to give an account of the past, but this brings me back to the first essay I've ever read on this channel, the pseudo-conservative revolt. The specific part I remember was the pseudo-conservative using anti-war rhetoric, claiming to be against wars while simultaneously refusing to do and even actively working against things that would help prevent future wars. In this case, the Nazis will claim to hate the oppression and exploitation of the people, while actively working against anything that would solve the problems they complained about on a wide systemic scale. They attacked labor unions, they squashed worker safety laws, even divested from industries that the Weimar Republic had previously invested in. And neat fact, the magazine The Economist coined the term privatization to describe Nazi Germany's domestic economic policies. For all intents and purposes, the Nazis basically gave special economic privileges to businesses run by their political supporters, but that was okay to them, as said supporters had the interests of the people in mind. They really didn't change much of anything, they just effectively appointed individuals with what they deemed to be a proper mindset, and expected the rest of it to work out on its own. Of course, if you tried logically to break down what Hitler was advocating for, it wouldn't make much sense, but you're not supposed to do that. Hitler wanted everyone to rely on their gut and instincts rather than understanding. In hindsight, this makes perfect sense. What do you expect from a man who opens a speech by saying, "I am not here to give an account of the past," and then spends the bulk of the next 2 hours talking about the past?
Hello, this is Fax 5 saying thank you for listening, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed it. If you can, please like and share it around, and if you're feeling especially generous, please subscribe. I need at least 100 subscribers to change my YouTube channel's URL, and my default is long and ugly, and I really don't like it. It would be extremely helpful for me if you subscribed. But you don't have to. I'm not your boss. I'm just Fax 5 and right now, I'm signing off.